Hey everyone, tonight we're descending into humanity's greatest nightmare. The evolution of hell from a simple grey afterlife into the most sophisticated torture chamber ever conceived by the human imagination. Not just the threat of punishment, but the slow transformation of death from democratic ending into cosmic courtroom, where your eternal fate hangs in the balance of scales no mortal hand can tip. Before we begin, hit like if you're ready to discover how hell went from being an equal opportunity afterlife to a personalized horror show designed specifically for your worst fears, and let me know in the comments what version of hell terrifies you most. Now dim those lights and settle in. We're about to explore how humanity took the simple fact of death and transformed it into the ultimate weapon of social control, psychological manipulation, and existential terror, and why the death of hell in our modern world might be creating hells far worse than anything our ancestors ever imagined. Now, without further ado, let's begin. The dead do not scream in the oldest hells. They do not burn. They do not weep for mercy or rage against their fate. In the beginning, before fire and brimstone became the currency of the afterlife, the dead simply fade. Picture this: a Sumerian farmer, his hands still stained with the black earth of Mesopotamia, dies in his sleep sometime around 2500 BC. His family weeps. They bury him with bread and beer, copper tools and clay tablets bearing his name. But where does he go? Not to judgment, not to punishment or reward. He goes to Irkala, the land of no return, where dust settles on everything like a grey shroud that never lifts. In ancient Sumer, death is not a reckoning. It is simply less. The farmer joins the ranks of the Etemu, the shades of the dead, wandering through endless twilight corridors beneath the earth. Here, in humanity's first imagined afterlife, kings and slaves shuffle together through the same dim passages. The Sumerian king list speaks of rulers who went to the land of no return, but even in death, their glory dims to the same grey pallor that claims every soul. The architecture of this ancient underworld is telling. No lakes of fire, no torturous mechanisms, no screaming demons. Instead, Irkala is built like a vast silent house where the rooms stretch on forever and the dust of the dead carpets every floor. The goddess Ereshkigal rules here, not with malice, but with the cold indifference of entropy itself. She does not punish, she simply presides over the slow dissolution of what once was human. But listen, this is crucial. In these earliest visions of death, morality plays no role. The farmer and the king, the murderer and the saint, all walk the same dusty corridors. The afterlife is not about justice. It is about the simple, terrible truth that life ends, and what follows is less than what came before. The burial grounds tell this same story across ancient Mesopotamia. The dead are buried with possessions, yes, but not as rewards for virtue or protections against punishment. They carry bread because the dead still hunger, but in a diminished way. They carry tools because some pale echo of their earthly needs persists, but muted, grey, endless. This understanding spreads like shadow across the ancient world. When Homer composes the Odyssey in the 8th century BC, he imagines Odysseus visiting the underworld. And what does the hero find? Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived, tells him that he would rather be a slave on earth than king of all the dead. The shades cluster around Odysseus like moths drawn to his living warmth, desperate for even a taste of the blood he offers. Blood that gives the momentary substance, momentary memory of what it felt like to be real. This is not hell as punishment. This is hell as diminishment. The heroes of Troy, these men who carved their names into legend with bronze and blood, are reduced to whispers in the dark. They exist, but barely. They remember, but faintly. Homer's Underworld is a place where even the greatest among us learn that death makes equals of all, but equals in lessness, equals in the slow fade to grey. In the Hebrew tradition, Sheol emerges around 1000 BC with the same terrible indifference. The word itself comes from roots meaning to ask or to demand. Sheol is the place that demands all the living, regardless of their deeds. When Job cries out in his suffering, he speaks of Sheol not as a place of punishment, but as a place of silence. There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. Even Jacob, when he believes his son Joseph is dead, says he will go down to Sheol mourning. Notice what is missing from these ancient Hebrew texts. Any suggestion that Sheol sorts the righteous from the wicked. It takes everyone. It holds everyone in the same quiet grip. The psalmist writes, "In death there is no remembrance of thee. In Sheol who shall give thee thanks?" Death is not about facing judgment for your deeds. Death is about joining the place where even God's voice grows faint. The graves support this vision. Early Hebrew burial practices show no evidence of moral sorting in death. The good and the wicked lie in similar graves, with similar provisions. The focus is not on preparation for judgment, but on providing comfort for a long, diminished existence in the shadows. But perhaps most telling is the way these ancient peoples speak of the dead visiting the living. In Mesopotamian texts, in Hebrew scripture, in Homer's epics, the dead sometimes return, but they return as pale echoes, shadows seeking warmth. When the witch of Endor calls up the spirit of Samuel for King Saul, the prophet's shade is not burning in punishment or basking in reward. He is simply disturbed from his rest, irritated at being pulled back from the quiet grey place where he now dwells. Even in the far north, among the Germanic tribes, the goddess Hel presides over a realm that bears her name. But this Hel is not a place of torment. It is simply the place where those who do not die gloriously in battle go to rest. Cold, perhaps. Dim, certainly. But not punitive. The dead feast in Hell's hall, but the food tastes of nothing. The mead brings no joy. It is existence without the fire of life. Aboriginal Australian cultures speak of the dream time, where the spirits of the dead continue their journey, but this too is not about moral judgment. Death is transition, not trial. The ancestors watch over the living, but they do so from a place that exists alongside our world, not above or below it in moral hierarchy. What strikes us, looking back across these ancient visions, is their honesty about death's democracy. Rich and poor, virtuous and wicked, hero and coward, all go to the same grey place. The afterlife is not about getting what you deserve. It is about accepting what you get, which is less than what you had. These early peoples understood something we have perhaps forgotten. That death, whatever else it might be, is first and foremost the end of the warm, bright, chaotic business of being alive. Everything after is shadow, echo, diminishment. Not punishment, just less. The farmer's shade still wanders Irkala, neither suffering nor celebrating, but existing in that strange space between being and non-being. His barley fields are long forgotten. His name has crumbled from its clay tablet. But somewhere in the grey corridors beneath the world, something that was once him continues, quiet as settling dust, patient as stone. This is the first hell, not a place of fire, but a place of forgetting, not a realm of justice, but a realm of inevitability, and perhaps, in its honest acknowledgement of death's democracy, it is the most terrible hell of all, because it asks nothing of us but surrender. It promises nothing but the slow fade to grey that awaits every living thing. In the beginning, hell was not about what we deserved. Hell was simply about what we could not avoid. The heart weighs heavy in the dead man's chest as he stands before the scales of Ma'at. For the first time in human history, death has become a courtroom. and the dead must answer for what they have done. This is Egypt, 2500 BC, and everything has changed. The grey democracy of Sheol and Irkala is cracking open, replaced by something far more terrifying: the possibility that you might deserve what comes next. Watch the soul of Ani, a royal scribe, as he enters the Hall of Two Truths. His journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, has been a gauntlet of horrors that would make Dante weep. He has sailed rivers of liquid fire while serpents with human heads try to drag his boat into the burning depths. He has passed through gates guarded by demons whose names must be spoken correctly or face annihilation. The Eater of Hearts lurks nearby, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, waiting to devour those found wanting. But now comes the moment that will echo through every hell that follows. Ani's heart is placed on the golden scales. On the other side sits the feather of Ma'at, truth itself, light as breath, heavy as eternity. If his heart weighs more than the feather, if it is heavy with sin, the Eater of Hearts will swallow it whole, and Ani will suffer the second death, not mere diminishment, but complete annihilation. This is the birth of cosmic justice. For the first time, the afterlife sorts the worthy from the unworthy. The dead are no longer equal in their greyness. Some will feast in the field of reeds, living forever in a perfect version of Egypt where the Nile never fails and the harvests never end. Others will be destroyed so completely that even their names will be forgotten. The tombs of Egypt whisper this transformation. In the pyramid texts carved into Pharaoh's burial chambers, we find something unprecedented: spells and prayers, not just for comfort in death, but for vindication. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not told lies. These negative confessions reveal a new anxiety, the fear that death might judge us. But Egypt is not alone in this revolution. Far to the east, in the mountains of Persia, another vision of judgment takes hold. Zoroaster speaks of the Chinvat Bridge, narrow as a razor's edge, spanning the chasm between life and death. When the soul attempts to cross, the bridge responds to the weight of their deeds. For the righteous, it widens to a comfortable path. For the wicked, it becomes thinner than a hair, and they plummet into the house of lies, where they will dwell in darkness until the final renovation of the world. Picture Vishtaspa, a Persian nobleman who has just died in battle around 500 BC. As his soul approaches the bridge, he meets a figure, young and beautiful if his life was good, ancient and hideous if it was corrupt. This is his own conscience made manifest, his deeds given form. Together they attempt the crossing. If Vishtaspa was just and truthful, spoke only good words and performed only good acts, his guide will lead him safely across. If not, the bridge waits like a blade. In the fire temples of ancient Persia, priests tend flames that have burned for centuries, symbols of the cosmic battle between light and darkness that now defines death itself. Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, offers humanity a choice: follow the path of truth and light, or fall into the domain of Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Death becomes the final examination, the moment when cosmic justice reveals which side you truly served. This Persian vision seeps westward, mixing with Greek philosophy in ways that will reshape the Western imagination forever. Plato, in his Republic, tells of the Pamphylian, a soldier who dies in battle but returns to life with tales of what he saw beyond death. Describes a place where souls stand before judges who can see every deed written upon their spirits. The just are sent upward to heaven, the unjust downward to a place of purification and punishment. But it is in the Greek underworld itself that we see judgment refined into art. Tartarus, the deepest pit of Hades, becomes a place of exquisite torments reserved for the worst offenders. Tantalus, who served his son as a meal to the gods, stands forever in a pool that recedes when he bends to drink, beneath fruit trees whose branches lift away when he reaches for them. Sisyphus, who cheated death itself, pushes his boulder up the mountain for eternity, watching it roll back down each time he nears the summit. These are not random sufferings. They are punishments that mirror the crimes. Tantalus can never satisfy the hunger he used to manipulate others. Sisyphus can never achieve the permanent victory over death he sought. For the first time, hell becomes poetic justice. Meanwhile, in the developing Jewish tradition, the concept of Gehenna begins to emerge from the ashes of child sacrifice. The Valley of Hinnom, where children were once burned alive for the god Molech, becomes a metaphor for ultimate judgment. But even here, in the earliest Jewish texts, Gehenna is not quite the eternal hell of later Christianity. It is a place of purification, terrible but temporary, where the wicked are cleansed of their sins like silver refined in fire. The Book of Enoch, written around 300 BC, expands this vision into cosmic scope. Enoch is taken on a tour of the places prepared for judgment. Valleys of fire for the wicked, gardens of light for the righteous. He sees the tree of life, which will give immortality to the just, and the accursed valley where the angels who corrupted humanity await their final punishment. For the first time, hell gets geography, architecture, a sense of place that exists somewhere specific in the cosmic order. The Dead Sea Scrolls echo this transformation. The War Scroll speaks of a final battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, where the fate of every soul will be decided not by the democracy of death, but by the side they chose in the cosmic war between good and evil. Death is no longer neutral. Death takes sides. But perhaps the most profound change is not in the mechanics of judgment, but in its psychology. When the pharaoh Akhenaten dies around 1330 BC, his heart beats with a new kind of terror, not the quiet dread of inevitable diminishment, but the sharp fear of earned punishment. He has lived a life of religious revolution, overturning the old gods for his worship of the Aten. Will his heart weigh light as Marwat's feather? Or will his radical changes damn him in the eyes of cosmic justice? This is the anxiety that Birth of Judgment creates. In the grey hells of Mesopotamia and early Greece, death was terrible but simple. Everyone faded equally. Now death becomes personal. Your choices matter. Your actions echo into eternity. The afterlife becomes a mirror that shows you exactly who you were and forces you to live with that reflection forever. In the Persian fire temples, in the Egyptian mortuary complexes, in the Greek mystery schools, a new kind of priest emerges. Not just one who tends the dead, but one who teaches the living how to die well. These priests understand something revolutionary. If death is judgment, then life becomes preparation for judgment. Ethics are no longer just about social harmony or personal happiness. Ethics become a matter of eternal consequence. The scribe Ani, standing before those golden scales, represents more than one man's judgment. He represents the moment when humanity realizes that the universe might be watching, weighing, remembering. The feather of Ma'at trembles in the balance, and with it, our understanding of what it means to be morally responsible beings in a cosmos that cares about justice. The heart settles onto the scales, the feather waits, and for the first time in human history, a dead man discovers whether his life was worth living. Not in memory, not in legacy, but in the terrible mathematics of cosmic justice. The balance tips, the verdict is rendered, and hell for the first time becomes something you might deserve. The fire never dies in Christian hell, never flickers, never offers the mercy of ash and ending. It burns with the consistency of mathematics, the reliability of theology, the permanence of divine judgment, and it burns forever. This is the revolution that splits the afterlife in two, where the Egyptians promised annihilation for the truly wicked, where the Persians spoke of purification in darkness. Where even the Greeks imagined torments that served a purpose, Christianity birthed something unprecedented. Suffering without end, without hope, without the possibility of redemption. Listen to the screams echoing from a Roman execution pit in the Valley of Hinnom, where criminals burn alive in sight of Jerusalem's walls. The smell of charred flesh mingles with garbage fires that never quite die out. Jewish children grow up knowing this place, this Gehenna, as the valley where the worst things happen to the worst people. But when Christian theologians inherit this imagery, they do something terrible with it. They remove the mercy of death. The early church fathers, men like Tertullian writing around 200 AD, take the temporary purification fires of Jewish Gehenna and stretch them into eternity. The fire of hell, Tertullian writes, is eternal, prepared for the devil and his angels. Not cleansing fire, not temporary fire, eternal fire. The mathematics of infinite punishment for finite sins. But the Christian hell that haunts our nightmares doesn't spring fully formed from Scripture. It grows, fed by imperial anxieties and monastic terrors, watered with the blood of martyrs and the paranoia of monks who see demons in every shadow. In the desert monasteries of Egypt, around 350 AD, Anthony the Great wrestles with visions that reshape hell into something more intimate and psychological. The demons that attack him don't just threaten his body, they threaten his soul with visions of the torments awaiting those who fail in their spiritual battles. Anthony sees hell not just as punishment for the wicked masses, but as the specific fate awaiting anyone who fails to achieve perfect spiritual discipline. This is crucial. Christian hell becomes personal in a way that Egyptian or Persian judgment never was. It's not enough to avoid murder and theft. You must root out every trace of pride, lust, anger, envy. The smallest sin, unforgiven, becomes kindling for eternal fire. Watch this evolution through the eyes of a Roman centurion named Marcus, converting to Christianity around 380 AD as the empire itself transforms. In his old religion, the underworld was distant, impersonal. Pluto ruled over the dead but rarely interfered with the living. But the Christian preachers tell Marcus something that makes his blood run cold. Hell is not just waiting for him after death. Hell is watching him now, recording every lustful glance, every moment of anger, every coin not given to the poor. The monks writing the Visio Tenugdale around 1150 AD perfect this psychological torture into literary art. Their vision describes a knight named Tenugdale whose soul is taken on a tour of hell, while his body lies unconscious. He sees souls stretched on grids of red-hot iron. He watches demons with breath like sulfur and claws like swords tear apart the proud and the greedy. But the true horror is not in the physical torments. It's in their precision. Each punishment fits the sin with mathematical exactness. The gluttons are forced to eat burning coals. The lustful are burned in their genitals. The proud are hung by the body parts they were most vain about. This is hell as cosmic bookkeeping, and it reaches its perfect expression in the mind of a Florentine poet who will make Satan himself weep frozen tears. Dante Alighieri, writing his Inferno around 1314 AD, doesn't invent Christian hell. He architects it. In the depths of his imagination, hell becomes a perfectly organized city of suffering, 9 circles deep, each designed with the precision of a master engineer and the cruelty of a perfect judge. Picture Dante himself, lost in the dark wood of midlife crisis, guided by the Roman poet Virgil into the mouth of hell. What they find is not chaos, but order. Perfect, terrible order. The uncommitted, those who never chose good or evil, chase banners through the vestibule while hornets sting them eternally. The lustful, who let passion drive their reason, are blown about by endless winds. The gluttonous lie in freezing slush, tormented by Cerberus, the 3-headed hound. But Dante's genius and his horror lies in the architecture itself. Hell is not a random pit of fire. It is a funnel, carved into the earth when Satan fell from heaven, each level bringing sinners closer to the frozen lake at its center, where Satan himself chews the three greatest traitors in his three mouths: Judas, who betrayed Christ, and Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Caesar. Notice the poetry of this construction. The deeper you descend, the colder it becomes. The closer you get to the ultimate evil, the more you find not burning passion, but frozen isolation. Satan, the ultimate sinner, is not a king ruling in flames, but a prisoner trapped in ice, weeping tears that freeze as they fall. This is hell as moral geography. Dante places the souls not randomly, but according to the precise nature of their sins and the state of their hearts when they died. The violent boil in rivers of blood. The fraudulent are trapped in ditches and flames. The treacherous are frozen in ice, some with only their heads above the surface, others completely encased, their tears freezing in their eyes. Each punishment teaches a lesson about the nature of sin itself. The fortune tellers have their heads twisted backward so they can only see behind them, a perfect punishment for those who claimed to see the future. The hypocrites wear gilded lead robes that look beautiful but crush them with their weight. The thieves have their forms constantly stolen from them, morphing endlessly between human and serpent shapes. But Dante's hell draws from more than Christian theology. Islamic texts describing Jahannam, with its 7 levels and precise torments, echo through his work. The Quran speaks of boiling water poured over the heads of the damned, of their skins being renewed so they can feel the fire afresh, of trees whose fruit burns like molten brass. These images, filtered through the cultural exchange of medieval Spain, darken the Christian imagination with new possibilities for suffering. Medieval art amplifies these literary visions into something that haunts the visual imagination. In cathedral sculptures and illuminated manuscripts, hell becomes theatre. Demons with the faces of animals and the bodies of men drag souls into cauldrons. Satan himself, often depicted as a massive figure with multiple heads, devours sinners while excreting them from his lower orifices, only to devour them again in an endless cycle of consumption and degradation. The Council of Florence in 1439 AD makes it official doctrine: hell is eternal punishment in fire for all who die in mortal sin. No escape, no reprieve, no second chances. The fires of purgatory might eventually purify, but the fires of hell burn forever without consuming, torture without destroying, punish without hope of rehabilitation. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this evolved Christian hell is its democracy of damnation. Unlike the Egyptian afterlife, where the pharaohs have a better chance at paradise, or the Greek underworld, where heroes might find better treatment, Christian hell takes everyone equally: peasant and king, saint and sinner, the only difference being the level of their torment. In the monasteries of medieval Europe, monks spend their nights in terror of this hell. They practice flagellation, wear hair shirts, sleep on stones, anything to avoid the eternal fire that awaits the slightest spiritual misstep. Hell becomes not just a threat for murderers and thieves, but for anyone who fails to achieve perfect spiritual purity. The merchant Bruno, dying of plague in Florence in 1348, exemplifies this terror. As his body burns with fever, his mind burns with the fear that his life of commerce, the small cheats, the interest charged, the poor not helped, has earned him eternity in Dante's third circle, lying in putrid slush under the claws of Cerberus. The Black Death ravaging Europe seems like a preview of hell itself, and Bruno dies not knowing whether his last confession was sufficient to save him from the flames that never die. This is the psychological torture that Christian hell perfects. The uncertainty. Unlike the Egyptian scales that render immediate judgment, Christian hell makes every believer a prosecutor of their own soul. Did I confess every sin? Was my contrition complete? Did I perform sufficient penance? The questions burn even in life, preparing the faithful for an eternity where such questions might finally receive their terrible answers. By the time Dante has finished his great poem, hell has become what it remains today in the Western imagination. Not just punishment for the wicked, but the cosmic threat that makes all morality meaningful. Every choice carries infinite weight, because every choice might determine infinite suffering. The flames rise higher, the ice grows thicker, and somewhere in the depths, Satan weeps his frozen tears, while Dante's words echo through centuries of nightmares. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. The fire never dies. That is its promise and its curse. In making hell eternal, Christianity doesn't just threaten the body, it threatens the very possibility of redemption itself. And in the frozen heart of that threat, Western civilization learns a new kind of fear, the fear that we might deserve exactly what we get forever. The clipboard burns in the demon's hands, but the paperwork never catches fire. In the Chinese underworld of DU, even damnation requires proper documentation. This is hell as bureaucracy, death as administrative procedure, suffering organized with the efficiency of a cosmic civil service. Where Western hell burns with the passion of eternal justice, Eastern hell processes souls with the methodical precision of a vast governmental machine that never makes mistakes and never offers appeals. Watch Judge Chu Jiang reviewing the file of Li Wei, a merchant who died choking on rice wine in a brothel in 12th century Hangzhou. The judge, one of 10 kings who rule the courts of DU, sits behind a desk made of polished bone, his face the color of dried blood, his eyes holding the weary patience of a magistrate who has seen every possible crime and excuse. Li Wei's life scrolls past like an accountant's ledger, profits skimmed from grain sales during famines, bribes paid to avoid military service, lies told to his dying mother about his gambling debts. But this is not Dante's hell of poetic justice. This is hell as cosmic efficiency. Judge Chu Jiang does not craft Li Wei's punishment to mirror his crimes. He simply stamps the appropriate form and sends the soul to the appropriate department. Department 3, subsection 7, the hell of grinding. Li Wei will be ground between millstones for exactly 847 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not because the punishment fits the crime, but because that is what the regulations specify for his particular combination of greed and filial disobedience. The Buddhist concept of Naraka makes suffering temporary but precise. Unlike Christian hell, where damnation lasts forever, the hells of Buddhism and Hinduism operate on the principle of exhaustion. You suffer until your negative karma burns away, like a candle consuming its wax. But the mathematics of this suffering are staggering. In the Avicii hell, the deepest of the hot Narakas, souls burn for one intermediate kalpa, approximately 1.28 trillion years. When that eon ends, they are reborn, only to die and fall back into hell again for another cycle. Picture Ananda, a Hindu merchant who cheated temple donations in the 8th century Kashmir, falling through the levels of Naraka like a stone dropped down a well. First comes Tamishra, the hell of darkness, where demon guards beat him with clubs until his body becomes like iron. Then Andhatamisra, where he is bound and tormented by birds and beasts with iron beaks and claws. Each hell specializes in particular torments. Raurava for those who enjoyed others' suffering, Maharaurava for those who destroyed entire families, Kumbhipaka where souls are cooked in oil like insects in a lamp. But the genius of Eastern hell lies not just in its variety, but in its logic. Each realm addresses specific karmic debts with the precision of cosmic accounting. In Asipatravana, the forest of sword leaves, those who cut down trees and destroyed plant life run beneath trees whose leaves are razor-sharp swords that slice them as they fall. In Shaumali, those who violated others are forced to climb trees with thorns as long as spears, their flesh shredding with each step upward toward the crows and vultures that await them in the branches. The architecture of Eastern hell reveals a different understanding of justice. Where Dante's Inferno descends in a funnel towards Satan's frozen maw, Buddhist and Hindu hells spread horizontally. 8 hot Narakas arranged around the central Avicii, 8 cold Narakas in the periphery, with hundreds of subsidiary hells for specialized punishments. It is not depth that matters, but breadth. Hell is a vast complex of specialized facilities, each designed for maximum efficiency in burning away particular forms of karmic debt. In the cold Narakas, souls who told lies that harmed others find themselves naked in landscapes where blizzards rage eternally. Arbuda hell encases them in blisters from the cold. Nirabuda cracks those blisters open. Atata and Hahava are named for the sounds the damned make when their tongues freeze to the roofs of their mouths. In Utpala, their skin turns blue as the Utpala flower. In Padma, it turns red as the Padma lotus. In Pundarika, it cracks and bleeds like an overripe fruit. But observe the profound difference. These souls are not damned. They are being processed. Like patients in a cosmic hospital, they will emerge from their treatment healed of the karmic diseases that brought them there. Hell becomes therapeutic rather than retributive. Painful medicine rather than eternal punishment. The Tibetan Book of the Dead maps this process with the precision of a medical textbook. When Tenzin, a 14th century Tibetan monk who succumbed to pride and anger, dies in his monastery cell, his consciousness enters the bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth. For 49 days, he experiences visions that reflect his karma. Peaceful deities offering liberation, wrathful deities demanding confrontation with his negative actions. If Tenzin cannot achieve liberation in the bardo, if his karma pulls him toward rebirth in hell, the text describes exactly what he will experience. He will see himself naked in a landscape of red light, feeling intense heat. Yama's messengers, beings with animal heads and human bodies, will drive him toward judgment with weapons and chains. But even in his terror, the text reminds him, these are projections of his own mind, karmic formations taking visible shape. Hell is real, but it is also a reflection of consciousness itself. Yama, the Lord of Death, appears across these traditions with variations that reveal different cultural fears. In Hindu mythology, he is the first man to die, who becomes the guide for all who follow. In Buddhist legend, he is the righteous king who chose to rule hell rather than heaven, because more souls needed his guidance in the lower realms. In Chinese tradition, he multiplies into the 10 judges of Diyu, each specializing in different aspects of moral judgment. But perhaps most telling is the Japanese adaptation of these traditions. In medieval Japan, Yama becomes Enma-O, and hell becomes a reflection of samurai justice. The souls of dead warriors appear before Enma-O's tribunal not in the robes of merchants or farmers, but in their battle armor, carrying their swords. They are judged not only for their violence, but for their honor in violence. Did they kill in righteous battle or for personal gain? Did they show mercy to defeated enemies or glory in unnecessary cruelty? The warrior Minamoto no Tametomo, who died by seppuku in 1170 AD after his defeat in the Hogan Rebellion, faces this distinctly Japanese form of hellish judgment. Enma-O examines not just his killing, but his manner of killing. The souls of those he executed honorably in battle speak in his defense. The spirits of those he killed in anger or from personal hatred testify against him. Hell becomes a courtroom where the dead themselves serve as witnesses. In Japanese hell, the specialized punishments reflect specifically Japanese fears. The Jigoku Zoshi scroll paintings show souls being boiled in cauldrons for different periods based on their crimes, but also souls being forced to climb mountains of needles for vanity, or having their tongues stretched and nailed to boards for lying about their lords. Hell adapts to the moral framework of Bushido, the way of the warrior. The bureaucratic aspect reaches its peak in Chinese Diyu, where hell literally functions as a government office. Souls receive identification numbers. Their cases are reviewed by multiple judges. Appeals are possible, but rarely successful. The infrastructure includes departments for special cases. Suicides are processed differently from murder victims. Children who died young have their own administrative track. Virtuous souls who accumulated minor demerits are handled by a separate bureau altogether. The city god of each Chinese city maintains branch offices in Diyu to handle the souls of his former citizens. Local officials who are corrupt in life find themselves assigned to work in these same bureaucratic systems in death, but now as low-level clerks processing the cases of others, spending millennia stamping forms and filing documents in a cosmic irony that makes their punishment perfectly appropriate to their crimes. But the most profound difference between Eastern and Western hell lies in its relationship to time. Where Christian hell stretches into infinite future, Eastern hell operates in cycles. Souls suffer, are reborn, accumulate new karma, die again, suffer again. Hell is not an ending but a phase in an endless wheel of existence. The merchant Li Wei, ground to powder in Diyu's mills, will eventually be reborn. Perhaps as a beggar who learns generosity through necessity. Perhaps as a pig who experiences what it means to be slaughtered for others' pleasure. This cyclical vision creates a different kind of terror. In Christian hell, you suffer because you are fundamentally condemned. In Eastern hell, you suffer because you are fundamentally ignorant, trapped in cycles of craving and aversion that generate endless karmic consequences. The torture is not punishment for being evil, but medicine for being confused about the nature of reality itself. The karma that brings souls to Naraka is like a poison that must be sweated out through suffering. The merchant who cheated customers burns in oil until the greed that motivated his cheating is literally burned away. The soldier who enjoyed killing faces, weapons, and violence until his attraction to violence becomes revulsion. The corrupt official who took bribes spends eons in poverty and hunger until he learns the value of what he stole from others. In the end, Eastern hell reveals itself as a vast machine for teaching, brutal, efficient, impartial, but ultimately educational. The demons who operate its machinery are not fallen angels or embodiments of evil, but cosmic civil servants doing necessary work. They take no pleasure in the suffering they administer, feel no malice toward their charges. They are surgeons removing karmic tumors, teachers using pain as curriculum, accountants balancing cosmic books that must be balanced. Judge Chujiang stamps another form. Another soul moves to its assigned suffering. Another lesson begins in the classrooms of cosmic pain. And somewhere in the vast administrative machinery of Eastern hell, progress is being made. Slow, methodical, bureaucratic progress toward the ultimate goal of teaching every consciousness to see clearly, to choose wisely, to generate no more karma that requires such harsh correction. The clipboard burns, but the work continues. In the end, that may be the most terrifying thing about Eastern hell, not that it exists, but that it is necessary, efficient, and ultimately compassionate in its own cosmic way. The jaguar's roar echoes through Xibalba as the ball rolls across the court, where gods play games with human skulls for stakes. This is not hell as punishment. This is hell as trial, death as test, the underworld as a place where heroes go to prove they deserve to return to life. But the conquistadors who arrive in the Americas carrying crosses and smallpox see only demons in these indigenous visions. They cannot understand hells that teach rather than torture, underworlds that challenge rather than condemn. So they burn the codices, silence the storytellers, and replace the intricate mythologies of the New World with their own simple story of fire and damnation. What dies in those flames are hells older and stranger than anything Europe ever imagined. Listen to the drums in Tenochtitlan, 1480 AD, as Itzel prepares for her journey to Mictlan. She is not dying in sin. She is dying in childbirth, which the Aztecs honor as a form of battle. Her death makes her a Cihuateteo, a divine woman warrior. But first, her soul must complete the 4-year journey through the 9 levels of the Underworld. Mictlan is not about moral judgment. It is about persistence, cleverness, the ability to navigate cosmic obstacles through wit rather than virtue. Itzel's soul faces the clashing mountains that try to crush her between them. She must cross rivers where the current runs backward, climb hills that grow taller as she ascends them, survive winds sharp enough to cut flesh from bone. At each level, Mictlantecutli, the Lord of the Dead, and his wife Mictlantecuhtli test her resolve. They send serpents made of obsidian to block her path. They create illusions of her living children calling her back. They strip away everything she thought she knew about herself, until only her essential spirit remains, pure enough to reach the final realm where she can rest in the company of all who came before. This is hell as journey, death as adventure. The trials exist not to punish Itzel for her moral failures, but to prepare her for whatever comes next. The Aztec underworld assumes that death requires training, that souls need practice in being dead before they can do it properly. In the Maya creation myth, the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque descend into Xibalba to face the death gods in their own realm. The Lords of Death, names like Blood Gatherer, Demon of Filth, Bone Scepter, challenge the twins to a series of tests designed to kill them. They must survive a house filled with jaguars, a house filled with bats with blades for wings, a house where fire rains from the ceiling without pause. But here is the crucial difference. The twins are not being punished. They are being challenged. When they pass each test, they prove themselves worthy of divine status. When they fail and die, they use their death to teach death itself a lesson about resurrection. Xibalba becomes a school where even the teachers learn from their students. The ball court, where the twins play against the Lords of Death, reveals the true nature of Maya Hell. The game they play represents the movement of celestial bodies, the eternal struggle between life and death, light and darkness. Every point scored shifts the cosmic balance. Hell becomes not a place of static punishment, but an arena where the fundamental forces of existence compete for dominance. But when the Spanish arrive, they see only devils in these sophisticated theological systems. The native hells, with their emphasis on trials and transformations, cannot compete with the simple clarity of Christian damnation. Indigenous souls who once faced jaguars and obsidian serpents are now threatened with eternal fire for worshipping their ancestors. Across the ocean, in the kingdoms of West Africa, other hells are dissolving under different pressures. In Yoruba tradition, Orunapadi waits for those who die badly, not those who sin, but those who die without proper preparation, without the rituals that ensure a smooth transition to ancestor status. This is not moral hell, but procedural hell, a place for souls who fail to follow correct protocols rather than correct behavior. Watch Aduni, an 18th century Yoruba trader, as her soul approaches the crossroads between worlds. She died suddenly of fever before she could complete the proper ceremonies, before her family could perform the rituals that would establish her place among the ancestors. The Orisha Eshu, guardian of crossroads and boundaries, examines her spiritual documentation and finds it incomplete. But Orunapadi is not eternal damnation. It is bureaucratic purgatory, a place where souls wait while their living relatives complete the ceremonies that death interrupted. Aduni's punishment is not torture, but isolation. She cannot join the community of ancestors until her paperwork is properly filed in the spiritual realm. This understanding of hell as administrative error rather than moral failure creates a different relationship between the living and the dead. The living can actually help souls in hell by performing the correct rituals making the proper offerings, completing the interrupted ceremonies. Hell becomes solvable through community action rather than individual salvation. But the slave ships carry millions of Africans away from the communities that might have helped their souls navigate the bureaucracy of death. Torn from their ritual contexts, many die spiritually unprepared according to their own understanding, creating hells of displacement that no European theology can address. The enslaved develop new forms of spiritual practice that blend African traditions with imposed Christianity, creating unique visions of the afterlife. In the Sea Islands of South Carolina, Gullah communities speak of souls who cannot rest because they died too far from home, spirits trapped between worlds because the proper rituals were impossible in slavery's chaos. Meanwhile, in Australia, Aboriginal peoples have maintained dreaming traditions for over 60,000 years that contain some of humanity's oldest continuous spiritual practices. But their conception of what whites might call hell operates according to completely different principles. For the Yolngu people of Arnhem Land, the dead journey to Baralku, the island of the dead. But this journey is not about judgment. It is about returning to country, rejoining the ancestral beings who shaped the land during the dream time. Those who die improperly, who violate law or fail to maintain their connection to country, become wandering spirits, not punished souls, but lost ones, seeking the way home they forgot how to find. The punishment for spiritual violation is not eternal torture, but eternal displacement, being cut off from the land and community that give life meaning. This creates a hell based on relationship rather than morality, isolation rather than pain. In the Arctic, Inuit traditions speak of Sedna, the goddess of the sea who lives in Adlivun, the underworld beneath the ocean. But Sedna's realm is not a place of punishment. It is a place of transformation. Souls travel there to be cleansed before returning to new life. The spirits of seals, walruses, and whales gather around Sedna's lamp, waiting to be reborn. Those who violate the complex taboos that govern Inuit life may find themselves tangled in Sedna's hair, which becomes matted when humans break the spiritual laws that maintain balance between the human and animal worlds. But even this is not punishment. It is consequence. The shaman must journey to Sedna's realm to comb her hair and restore the spiritual harmony that allows the animals to give themselves to human hunters. This vision of hell as disrupted relationship, rather than divine punishment, creates different kinds of spiritual practices. Instead of confession and absolution, Arctic peoples develop shamanic techniques for journeying to the spirit world to repair the damage caused by broken taboos. But across the Pacific in Polynesia, volcanic islands create hells of fire that rival any Christian imagination while serving completely different spiritual purposes. In Hawaiian tradition, Pele the volcano goddess rules over realms of lava and steam where souls are tested by fire, not as punishment for moral failure, but as initiation into deeper spiritual understanding. The souls that survive Pele's trials emerge with mana, spiritual power that can only be earned through direct confrontation with the forces of creation and destruction. The navigator Kailani, dying in a volcanic eruption on the Big Island in 1200 AD, finds his soul carried by the lava flows into Pele's domain. But this is not Dante's Inferno. The fire here creates rather than destroys. Pele's realm is where new land is born, where spiritual transformation happens through direct contact with the creative power of the earth itself. Souls in Pele's hell learn to dance with the volcano, to move in harmony with forces that would destroy those who try to resist them. The punishment for failing these tests is not eternal torture, but spiritual stagnation, being unable to participate in the ongoing creation of the world. But European colonization brings different hells to these Pacific islands. Christian missionaries arrive with stories of eternal damnation that make no sense in cultures where fire creates rather than destroys, where death is transformation rather than ending. The native hells of trial and teaching are replaced with imported hells of judgment and punishment. What all these forgotten hells share is their integration with the living world. They are not separate realms of pure punishment, but extensions of earthly community, spiritual geography that reflects the actual landscape where people live and die. The jaguar-filled houses of Xibalba mirror the jungles of the Maya heartland. The ice of Inuit spirit worlds reflects the Arctic environment where taboo violations have life and death consequences. The volcanic fires of Polynesian hells correspond to the actual volcanoes that create and destroy Pacific islands. These hells teach souls to navigate the spiritual geography of their actual homelands rather than abstract moral categories. They prepare the dead for continued relationship with the living rather than eternal separation from earthly concerns. But colonization breaks these connections. Indigenous hells that made sense in their original context become primitive superstitions when viewed through European theological frameworks. Native peoples are forced to abandon spiritual practices that took millennia to develop, replacing them with imported concepts of individual salvation and eternal punishment that have no roots in their actual experience of place and community. The result is a spiritual displacement that creates new kinds of hell, the hell of cultural erasure, the hell of forced conversion, the hell of losing the stories that once made death navigable and meaningful. Today, in places where indigenous communities have managed to maintain their traditions, these older hells still offer their wisdom. They remind us that hell does not have to be about punishment, that death does not have to mean separation, that the journey through the underworld can be a path toward greater understanding rather than eternal suffering. The jaguar roars again in Xibalba, but now only a few remember how to hear its voice as invitation rather than threat. The ball still rolls across the court where gods and heroes play for stakes higher than any European theology ever imagined. And somewhere in the volcanic depths of Pele's domain, fire still teaches souls to dance with creation itself. These are the hells we forgot, the underworlds we lost when simpler stories of punishment and reward replaced the complex wisdom of peoples who understood death as another country, rather than the end of all countries. In their ashes, we might still find embers of different ways to die, different ways to navigate the darkness that awaits us all. The screaming happens inside her head now. Sister Teresa of Avila, writing by candlelight in her convent cell in 1577, describes a vision that will haunt Christianity for centuries. Hell not as a place, but as a state of mind. Damnation not as fire, but as the complete absence of God's presence in the soul. I felt a fire in my soul, she writes, her quill scratching against parchment in the pre-dawn darkness. I cannot say what this fire was like. My soul was filled with the most acute pain, though I could not tell where or how. I only knew that I was dying and that my soul was being torn apart. This is the moment hell moves inward. No longer a geographical location with rivers of fire and grinding wheels, hell becomes a psychological state, the experience of complete spiritual isolation, the soul's confrontation with its own emptiness. Teresa's vision marks the beginning of hell's transformation from external threat to internal reality, but she is not the first to glimpse this interior darkness. In Stockholm, 1745, Emanuel Swedenborg sits in his study, neither fully awake nor asleep, when the walls of reality dissolve around him. He finds himself standing in a place that looks like London, the same narrow streets, the same smoking chimneys. But the people here move with the mechanical precision of sleepwalkers. Their faces show no recognition of each other, no awareness of their surroundings. They have become what they most desired in life. But the fulfillment brings no satisfaction, only endless repetition. Swedenborg realizes he is witnessing hell as self-created suffering. The greedy count their money forever but never feel wealthy. The lustful pursue endless seductions but never experience love. The proud give speeches to empty halls, but never feel admired. Hell becomes not God's punishment, but the natural consequence of spiritual choices, souls creating their own prisons from their dominant desires. Hell is not a place, Swedenborg writes after this vision. Hell is a state of mind that spirits create for themselves when they turn away from divine love and wisdom. The fires of hell are the burning lusts that consume the soul when it seeks satisfaction in things that cannot satisfy. This psychological understanding spreads through the intellectual salons of Enlightenment Europe like a contagion. Hell stops being about demons with pitchforks and becomes about alienation, meaninglessness, the horror of existing without purpose or connection. In St. Petersburg, 1866, Fyodor Dostoevsky sits in his cramped apartment, gambling debts crushing down on him like stones, and writes words that will redefine hell for the modern world. Hell is the suffering of being unable to love. His character, Ivan Karamazov, declares that hell is simply the moment when we can no longer love, when our capacity for connection dies, while our need for it remains eternally alive. Dostoevsky's underground man lives in this hell, trapped in his own consciousness, unable to connect with others, tormented by his awareness of his isolation. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man, the underground man begins. And in those words, we hear the voice of modern hell, not external punishment, but internal poison, the soul eating itself in the darkness of its own making. This is hell as psychological realism. Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment experiences damnation not after death, but in life. Haunted by guilt, unable to sleep, tormented by the knowledge of what he has done. His hell is the inability to escape his own thoughts, the endless loop of self-condemnation that makes every moment a punishment. But the true horror of psychological hell emerges in the 20th century, when industrial-scale evil creates hells on earth that surpass anything theology ever imagined. In Auschwitz, 1943, Primo Levi experiences what he will later describe as the grey zone, a psychological state where normal moral categories cease to function, where survival requires the death of one's humanity. This is not the hell of fire and brimstone, but the hell of moral collapse, where the distinction between victim and perpetrator becomes meaningless. We had reached the bottom, Levi writes. It is not possible to sink lower than this. No human condition is more miserable than this, nor could it conceivably be so. Nothing belongs to us anymore. They have taken away our clothes, our shoes, even our hair. If we speak, they will not listen to us, and if they listen, they will not understand. The Holocaust creates a new category of hell, not punishment for sin, but the systematic destruction of human dignity. The camps become laboratories for discovering how much of a person's humanity can be stripped away while leaving them technically alive. Hell becomes not a place you go after death, but a condition you can be forced into while living. The survivors' accounts reveal psychological hells that traditional theology cannot address. Viktor Frankl, writing in Man's Search for Meaning, describes prisoners who died not from physical exhaustion, but from the loss of hope, the inability to imagine meaning in their suffering. These deaths represent a form of damnation, the soul's surrender to meaninglessness while the body still functions. In the psychiatric hospitals of the same era, other hells are being mapped. Patients subjected to lobotomies experience a form of living death. Their personalities surgically removed, their capacity for emotional connection severed by steel instruments. The doctors performing these procedures believe they are providing treatment, but the patients describe experiences that sound like classical descriptions of hell. Awareness without agency, existence without meaning, consciousness trapped in bodies that no longer feel like home. Carl Jung, studying these psychological hells, develops the concept of the shadow self, the dark aspects of personality that individuals refuse to acknowledge. In Jungian psychology, Hell becomes the confrontation with this shadow, the moment when the ego's carefully constructed self-image collapses and reveals the darkness that was always lurking beneath. Everyone carries a shadow, Jung writes, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Hell becomes not external punishment, but internal integration, the terrifying process of accepting everything you tried to deny about yourself. This psychological understanding infiltrates popular culture through horror stories that relocate hell from the afterlife to the human mind. Edgar Allan Poe's narrators experience hells of obsession and paranoia. The guilty protagonist of The Telltale Heart is tormented not by divine judgment, but by his own psychological inability to escape the consequences of his actions. Hell becomes the sound of the beating heart that won't stop, the evidence of guilt that cannot be silenced. In the 20th century, cinema perfects the art of psychological hell. The film Event Horizon presents a spaceship that travels to a dimension of pure evil, not a supernatural realm, but a place where human consciousness encounters its own capacity for infinite suffering. The crew members don't face demons or devils, but visions of their own worst memories and fears made manifest. The video game Silent Hill creates similar psychological landscapes, a town that reflects the inner darkness of whoever enters it. The monsters are not random demons, but manifestations of specific traumas and guilts. Hell becomes personalized, each soul creating its own unique torments from the raw material of its psychological wounds. Jean-Paul Sartre's play No Exit delivers the famous line, "Hell is other people," but the deeper meaning reveals psychological hell's true nature. The three characters trapped in a room together for eternity discover that hell is not torture imposed from outside, but the inability to escape the judgments and expectations of others. They become each other's tormentors simply by being unable to leave, unable to change, unable to become anything other than what they are in this moment of eternal confrontation. Modern trauma research provides scientific validation for these artistic insights. Post-traumatic stress disorder creates internal hells where past horrors replay endlessly in the mind. Veterans returning from combat describe flashbacks that feel more real than present reality, nightmares that feel more true than waking life. Hell becomes not a future threat, but a present condition, consciousness trapped in loops of remembered terror. The concept of complex PTSD reveals how prolonged abuse can create psychological hells that reshape personality itself. Survivors describe feeling like they live in multiple worlds simultaneously: the ordinary world where they function normally, and the internal world where they remain trapped in endless cycles of fear and hypervigilance. Hell becomes not a place, but a parallel dimension of consciousness that runs alongside normal life. In psychiatric hospitals, patients with severe depression describe experiences that mirror classical descriptions of hell: the inability to feel pleasure, the sense that time has stopped, the conviction that their suffering will never end. But these hells are created by brain chemistry rather than divine judgment, neurotransmitter imbalances that trap consciousness in states of hopelessness and despair. Addiction creates its own forms of psychological hell. The heroin addict in withdrawal experiences physical torments that rival anything described in medieval texts: muscles cramping, skin crawling, every cell in the body screaming for relief that feels impossible to achieve. But the deeper hell is psychological. The awareness that the substance that once provided escape has become the source of entrapment. The alcoholic faces hell as the progressive loss of choice. Each drink promises relief, but delivers greater bondage. Hell becomes the moment of recognizing that you no longer control your relationship with the substance, it controls you. The horror is not external punishment, but internal dissolution, watching your will dissolve in ethanol, while your awareness of the dissolution remains painfully clear. Modern technology creates new forms of psychological hell. Social media platforms design engagement algorithms that trap users in cycles of outrage and validation seeking. The dopamine hits from likes and shares create addiction patterns similar to gambling or drug use. Hell becomes the compulsive checking of feeds, the inability to exist without external validation, the slow erosion of the capacity for sustained attention or deep connection. The smartphone becomes a portable hell device, constantly interrupting thought, demanding attention, creating anxiety when separated from its owner. Hell is no longer a place you go, but a condition you carry, a state of fractured consciousness where the present moment becomes impossible to inhabit fully. Climate anxiety creates existential hells for younger generations who inherit a planet in crisis. The knowledge that human activity is destroying the conditions necessary for human survival creates psychological states that mirror classical descriptions of despair and hopelessness. Hell becomes not individual punishment, but collective awareness of self-inflicted doom. In the therapeutic culture of the 21st century, hell often manifests as the inability to escape patterns of thought and behavior that cause suffering. The depressed person knows that negative thinking makes depression worse but cannot stop thinking negatively. The anxious person understands that worry serves no purpose but cannot stop worrying. Hell becomes psychological entrapment, awareness without agency, understanding without the power to change. But perhaps the most modern form of hell is the hell of overstimulation. Consciousness bombarded with more information, choices, and demands than it can process. Hell becomes not the absence of stimulation, but its overwhelming presence. The mind, evolved for simpler environments, breaks down under the constant assault of modern life's complexity. The executive suffering from burnout experiences hell as the inability to stop working even when work has lost all meaning. The parent overwhelmed by the demands of modern child-rearing faces hell as the gap between societal expectations and human capacity. Hell becomes not divine punishment, but the natural consequence of systems designed without regard for human psychological limits. In this interior landscape, salvation takes new forms. Therapy becomes a form of psychological exorcism, casting out the demons of trauma and dysfunction. Meditation offers escape from hell through the disciplined observation of mental states without identification with them. Pharmaceutical interventions promise chemical salvation from the hells of mental illness. But the deeper recognition emerging from psychological hell is that consciousness itself might be the source of suffering. The capacity for self-awareness that makes humans unique also makes us uniquely capable of psychological torment. We can imagine futures that terrify us, remember pasts that shame us, create internal narratives that make present moments unbearable. The mystics understood this paradox. Teresa of Avila's vision of interior hell was balanced by visions of interior heaven, states of consciousness where the soul experiences complete union with divine love. Hell and heaven become not places but possibilities of awareness, destinations of attention rather than geography. In the end, psychological hell reveals something profound about human nature. Our capacity for suffering is limited only by our capacity for consciousness itself. The same awareness that allows us to experience love, beauty, and meaning also allows us to experience isolation, ugliness, and despair. The screaming in Teresa's head continues, but now we understand that the screaming was always there, waiting in the depths of consciousness, requiring only the right conditions to become audible. Hell is not a place we might go. It is a possibility we carry within us, a potential of awareness that can be activated by trauma, loss, guilt, or simply the weight of being conscious in a universe that offers no guarantees of meaning or purpose. The fire burns inward now, and perhaps it always did. The prison cell in Norway looks nothing like hell. It has a flat-screen television, a small kitchenette, a window that opens to forest views. Anders Behring Breivik, who murdered 77 people in 2011, reads books, exercises, studies for his degree. He will never face torture, never experience the burning lakes or grinding wheels that once awaited history's monsters. The Norwegian state, which has abandoned belief in hell, instead offers rehabilitation, human dignity, the possibility of redemption even for the unredeemable. But in the villages outside Oslo, some survivors wake screaming in the night. They experience their own hells, flashbacks, survivor guilt, the endless replay of moments when they could have saved someone but didn't. Hell has not disappeared. It has simply moved from the cosmic to the personal, from the theological to the psychological. The question echoes in the darkness. If we no longer believe in hell as divine justice, how do we make sense of human evil? This is the crisis of meaning that haunts our age. For millennia, hell served functions beyond simple punishment. It was cosmic accounting system, moral mirror, psychological release valve. It promised that justice would ultimately prevail, that suffering had meaning, that the universe itself cared about right and wrong. When hell dies, what dies with it? Watch the evolution in a single family line. Björn the Viking, dying in 960 AD, expects nothing more than the grey halls of hell for those who don't die gloriously in battle. His descendant Magnus, a 14th century Christian, fears the eternal flames that await the unbaptized and unrepentant. Magnus's descendant Lars, an 18th century rationalist, dismisses hell as primitive superstition, but still fears divine judgment. Lars's great-grandson Erik, a 20th century secular humanist, replaces hell with human reason and social progress. But Erik's son Niels, born in 1990, inherits no cosmic framework for understanding evil at all. When terrorism strikes his peaceful Nordic world, when environmental collapse threatens his future, when economic inequality undermines his democracy, Niels has no mythology to help him understand why these things happen or what they mean. Hell's absence creates a vacuum that fills with anxiety, conspiracy theories, and the desperate search for someone to blame. The social functions of hell become clear only when they disappear. Hell was always more than individual punishment. It was cosmic quality control, the universe's way of assuring humans that evil would not ultimately triumph. The Roman emperor torturing Christians, the medieval lord starving peasants, the slave trader separating families, all would face justice even if earthly justice failed. Hell made moral sense of an immoral world, but hell also served darker purposes. In the churches of medieval Europe, priests describe the torments awaiting women who practice contraception, men who charge interest on loans, children who disobey their parents. Hell becomes social control, a way to enforce behaviors that serve institutional power rather than cosmic justice. The threat of eternal damnation keeps serfs in their fields, wives in their kitchens, subjects loyal to their kings. The Inquisition perfects this technique. Tomás de Torquemada, burning heretics in 15th century Spain, genuinely believes he is saving their souls from hell by torturing their bodies into confession. The logic is impeccable within its own framework. Temporary earthly pain to avoid eternal spiritual suffering. Hell justifies any cruelty in this life if it prevents greater cruelty in the next. But observe how hell's social control functions differently across cultures. In Hindu and Buddhist societies, where hell is temporary, the threat serves more as moral education than social coercion. The merchant who cheats customers will burn in oil, but only until his karma is purified. Hell becomes pedagogy rather than permanent deterrent. In Islamic societies, the precise justice of Allah's judgment creates different social dynamics. The rich who fail to pay zakat will have molten gold poured down their throats in hell. But the poor who steal from necessity face earthly punishment followed by divine mercy. Hell becomes a way to critique earthly inequality while maintaining cosmic justice. The gender dynamics of hell reveal society's deepest anxieties about power and control. Medieval European hell contains specialized torments for women who refuse traditional roles. Adulteresses suspended by their hair over lakes of fire. Contraceptive users forced to give birth to serpents. Ambitious women crushed under stones. Hell becomes the ultimate patriarchal enforcement mechanism, ensuring that even death cannot free women from the consequences of defying male authority. But in many African traditions, hell's gender dynamics reflect different concerns. Yoruba concepts of spiritual punishment focus less on sexual behavior and more on failures of kinship obligation. The woman who neglects her children's spiritual education faces consequences, but so does the man who fails to honor his ancestors. Hell becomes a way to maintain community bonds rather than gender hierarchies. Economic class shapes hell's architecture in revealing ways. Dante places usurers in the seventh circle of hell, reflecting medieval Christianity's anxiety about money lending and commercial activity. But he places traitors in the deepest circle, suggesting that betrayal of personal loyalty ranks worse than economic exploitation. Hell mirrors the values of feudal society, where personal bonds matter more than abstract justice. In Buddhist texts, hell contains special punishments for those who cheat temples and monasteries, reflecting a society where religious institutions depend on lay donations. The merchant who gives spoiled rice to monks faces eons of eating filth, while the king who steals temple land becomes a hungry ghost with an enormous appetite, but a mouth too small to satisfy it. The scientific revolution begins to crack hell's foundation. When Copernicus moves Earth from the center of the universe, when Galileo reveals other worlds circling other suns, when Newton discovers laws that govern celestial mechanics without divine intervention, hell loses its cosmic address. Where exactly is hell located if space is infinite? How do souls travel there if physics governs all motion? Hell begins to feel less like a place and more like a metaphor. The Enlightenment accelerates this dissolution. Voltaire mocks the anthropomorphic God who maintains torture chambers for eternity. David Hume argues that infinite punishment for finite crimes violates any rational sense of justice. Immanuel Kant relocates hell from divine punishment to moral conscience, making it a psychological rather than metaphysical reality. But the real death blow comes from evolutionary biology. If humans evolved from other species, if consciousness emerges from complex neural networks, if moral behavior serves reproductive advantage rather than cosmic purpose, then hell becomes merely a useful fiction rather than ultimate reality. Charles Darwin never intended to kill hell, but his insights make it impossible to maintain belief in eternal punishment for creatures whose moral capacities evolved through natural selection. The 20th century's industrial-scale horrors complete hell's transformation. The Holocaust, the gulags, the killing fields of Cambodia create earthly hells that surpass anything medieval imagination conceived. If humans can create such systematic evil without divine intervention, if innocent suffering happens on such massive scales, then either God is powerless to prevent hell on earth, or the cosmic justice system that hell represents is fundamentally broken. Modern psychology offers scientific explanations for behaviors that once required demonic influence. The serial killer's childhood trauma, the dictator's personality disorder, the terrorist's ideological conditioning, all become subjects for therapeutic intervention rather than eternal punishment. Evil becomes illness. Sin becomes dysfunction. Hell becomes a failure of proper mental health treatment. But what happens to societies that abandon hell? The Scandinavian countries provide a fascinating case study. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark have largely secular populations, highly developed social welfare systems, and criminal justice focused on rehabilitation rather than retribution. Their crime rates remain among the world's lowest, their social trust among the highest. They seem to prove that societies can maintain moral order without the threat of eternal punishment. Yet these same societies struggle with different problems. Birth rates fall below replacement levels, as citizens lose faith in the future. Depression and anxiety increase despite material prosperity. Political movements emerge that promise to restore meaning through nationalism, environmentalism, or other secular forms of ultimate concern. Hell's absence creates a meaning deficit that material comfort cannot fill. In Buddhist majority countries like Thailand and Myanmar, traditional beliefs about karmic hell coexist with modern skepticism in complex ways. Urban educated populations may reject literal belief in torture realms while maintaining cultural practices rooted in karmic thinking. Hell becomes cultural metaphor rather than literal reality, but the metaphor still shapes behavior and social expectations. The American South presents another model. Despite high levels of Christian belief, including literal belief in hell, the region maintains higher rates of violence, lower levels of social trust, and greater acceptance of inequality than more secular regions. Hell belief alone does not guarantee moral behavior. It may even justify cruelty through the logic of ultimate punishment. But hell's absence creates its own pathologies. In secular societies, justice becomes purely procedural rather than cosmic. The Norwegian mass murderer receives humane treatment while his victims' families struggle with psychological torment. The financial criminal who destroys thousands of lives faces prison terms measured in years while the damage lasts generations. Without hell as ultimate recourse, earthly justice feels inadequate to address evil's full magnitude. The environmental crisis reveals another function hell once served. Climate change creates a new form of apocalyptic thinking, but without traditional religious frameworks to contain it. The planet itself becomes hell as temperatures rise, oceans acidify, and ecosystems collapse. But this hell has no cosmic purpose, no divine plan, no ultimate meaning beyond human stupidity and greed. Young people inherit this hellish future without the consolation that suffering serves any greater purpose. Climate anxiety becomes a secular form of damnation. The knowledge that previous generations have condemned them to degraded conditions without their consent. Hell returns as environmental reality rather than spiritual metaphor. The digital age creates new hells that traditional religion never anticipated. Social media algorithms trap users in echo chambers of outrage and validation seeking. Online harassment campaigns destroy reputations and mental health with industrial efficiency. Artificial intelligence threatens to make human labor obsolete, creating economic hells for entire classes of workers. But these technological hells lack the cosmic framework that once made suffering meaningful. The cyberbullying victim experiences real torment, but not purposeful punishment. The displaced worker faces genuine economic hell, but not divine justice. Hell returns as system failure rather than moral consequence. Conspiracy theories proliferate in hell's absence, offering substitute explanations for why evil prospers and innocence suffers. QAnon, anti-vaccine movements, and political extremism provide simplified narratives of good versus evil that fill the cognitive space once occupied by religious cosmology. Hell is replaced by human villains, global elites, deep state operatives, cultural Marxists, who explain suffering through human agency rather than cosmic justice. The therapeutic culture attempts to replace hell with healing, damnation with recovery, eternal punishment with psychological growth. Trauma becomes the new original sin, therapy the new confession, self-actualization the new salvation. But this framework struggles with genuine evil, the predator who destroys children, the dictator who orchestrates genocide, the terrorist who murders innocents. What therapeutic intervention adequately addresses such evil? How do we understand monsters if not through some concept of damnation? The secular alternatives, mental illness, social conditioning, evolutionary mismatch, feel inadequate to evil's full magnitude. They explain evil without addressing its horror, analyze cruelty without condemning it with sufficient force. Some modern thinkers attempt to reconstruct hell in secular terms. The philosopher Thomas Nagel argues that moral responsibility requires the possibility of ultimate consequences, even if those consequences are not literally eternal punishment. Others suggest that hell serves necessary psychological functions, providing outlet for rage at injustice, confirming moral intuitions about cosmic fairness, offering hope that evil will ultimately face appropriate consequences. The neuroscientist Sam Harris proposes that hell already exists in the worst possible experiences conscious beings can have: in torture chambers, in severe mental illness, in the extremes of human suffering. Hell needs no afterlife location if it can be actualized in present reality. This relocates hell from cosmic geography to experiential possibility, while maintaining its moral seriousness. But perhaps hell's most important function was never punishment, but motivation. The possibility of damnation motivated extraordinary human achievements: cathedrals built over centuries, charitable institutions that outlasted empires, moral codes that restrained power. Fear of hell drove people to examine their consciences, question their motives, consider consequences beyond immediate gratification. Without hell, morality becomes more difficult to motivate. Why sacrifice present pleasure for future reward if no ultimate accounting exists? Why consider consequences beyond personal lifetime if no eternal perspective matters? Why care about strangers' welfare if no cosmic justice connects all beings? The effective altruism movement attempts to answer these questions through rational calculation rather than religious threat. Utilitarian philosophers argue that reducing suffering and increasing happiness provides sufficient motivation for moral behavior without requiring belief in divine punishment. But these movements remain confined to intellectual elites rather than motivating mass behavior. In the end, hell's death may be less complete than its absence suggests. New hells emerge constantly: environmental collapse, technological unemployment, social isolation, meaninglessness itself. The form changes, but the function persists. Consciousness confronting the possibility of ultimate suffering, meaning confronting the possibility of ultimate meaninglessness. The child waking from nightmares in contemporary Oslo faces terrors that would be familiar to a medieval peasant. The fear that evil is stronger than good, that suffering serves no purpose, that justice might never come. Hell relocates, but does not disappear. It moves from cosmic threat to personal anxiety, from theological certainty to existential dread. Perhaps this is hell's final victory, not that we suffer eternal punishment, but that we cannot stop imagining it. The capacity for experiencing hell seems built into consciousness itself, the price we pay for the self-awareness that makes us human. The Norwegian prison cell remains comfortable. The rehabilitation programs continue. The humane justice system functions according to its enlightened principles. But somewhere in the Nordic darkness, someone lies awake confronting the possibility that the universe does not care about justice, that evil might triumph, that suffering might mean nothing at all. And in that confrontation with meaninglessness, hell reveals its deepest truth. It was never about the afterlife. It was about the this life, the here life, the conscious moment when awareness meets the possibility of ultimate horror. Maybe hell isn't fire, or punishment, or demons. Maybe it's what happens when no one remembers what we were afraid of. And maybe, in our forgetting, we discover that some fears are worth keeping, some terrors too important to abandon, some hells too necessary to let die. The fire burns on, invisible now but not extinguished, waiting in the depths of consciousness for the next dreamer brave enough to descend into the darkness we carry within ourselves.